I still remember the order because it didn't feel important at the time, which is probably why I accepted it without thinking twice. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another late-night request in a long list of deliveries that all started to blur together after a while. Looking back, I should have canceled that order, but nothing about it felt serious enough to question. It came in a little after midnight, which wasn't unusual for me, but the details were thinner than usual. It's no clear drop-off instructions, no notes, and the address looked incomplete, like something was missing but still accepted by the app. I remember staring at it for a few seconds, thinking it might be a glitch, but the system didn't flag anything. That happens sometimes, especially during night shifts, so I shrugged it off and hit accept. It wasn't even the first strange order I'd seen, just the first one that left a feeling I couldn't explain. At the time, I told myself it was just fatigue, long hours, too much silence between stops. But there was something about that request that didn't sit right. Something small that kept pulling at the back of my mind. The timing, the lack of information, the way it appeared so suddenly between normal orders. I didn't have a good reason to decline it, and that's the part that still bothers me. So everything about it was just off enough to notice, but not enough to stop. I've had other deliveries since then with strange instructions, odd customers, even locations that didn't quite make sense. But this one was different. It was the first time I felt like I was heading somewhere I shouldn't be, even if I couldn't explain why. I picked up the order, followed the route, and didn't question it again until much later. And that's the part that doesn't make sense now. Because when I tried to look it up afterward, just to check something small that kept bothering me, it wasn't there anymore. No record, no history, nothing tied to that location. That address, I couldn't find it on the map later. Even when I tried different variations, zooming in, checking nearby streets, it was like it had never existed in the first place. And that was when the uneasiness really started to settle in. Most nights followed the same pattern, which is probably why I stopped questioning things after a while. I worked late shifts almost exclusively, not because I preferred them, but because they paid slightly better and there was less traffic to deal with. It was quieter, more predictable in a way that made the hours pass without much effort. I'd start around evening, log into the app, and wait for the first order to come through. Sometimes it took a few minutes, sometimes longer, depending on the area. I'd sit in my car, engine running, watching the screen, refreshing it without thinking. After a while, it became automatic, like a routine I didn't have to pay attention to anymore. Once the orders started coming in, the rest of the night would usually fall into place. Pick up, drive, drop off, repeat, different restaurants, different houses, but it all blended together. The navigation handled most of it, guiding me from one stop to the next with that same calm voice, telling me where to turn, when to slow down, when I'd arrived. There wasn't much thinking involved, and that was part of the appeal. The roads at night were mostly empty, especially in the quieter neighborhoods. Streetlights spaced out just enough to leave parts of the road in shadow. You'd pass the occasional car, maybe someone else working late, maybe someone heading home, but most of the time it felt like you had the whole place to yourself. I didn't mind that. It made things easier. Customers were usually the same too. Some would come out to meet you. Quick exchange, no conversation. Others preferred contactless drop-offs, just a note on the app telling you where to leave it. Front door, side gate, on the chair. Simple instructions that didn't require much thought. Every now and then you'd get someone a little off. Not dangerous, just different. Someone who talked too much, or avoided eye contact, or stood there a little longer than necessary. But nothing that felt like a real problem. You learn pretty quickly not to overthink those interactions. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just part of the job. The app handled everything. Orders came in, routes updated, payments tracked automatically. If something went wrong, you could report it, but most nights nothing did. It was smooth, almost mechanical. You just followed the system and trusted it to take you where you needed to go. But working nights does something to your perception after a while. There are fewer people around, fewer signs that things are normal. Stores are closed, houses are dark, and the usual noise you hear during the day disappears. You start to notice small things more, like a light on in a house that shouldn't be occupied, or a car parked in the same spot for hours. Addresses are harder to verify too. House numbers aren't always visible, and sometimes the navigation gets close but not exact. You rely on instinct more than anything else, checking landmarks, comparing what you see with what the app tells you. Most of the time, it works out. Most nights were predictable, routine, almost forgettable. I think that's why the strange ones stood out so clearly. Because when something didn't fit that pattern, even slightly, it felt louder than it should have. Story 1. The house with no lights. That first delivery didn't seem like anything special when I accepted it. Came through like any other. Just another stop in a steady flow of orders. But I remember noticing how quiet everything felt as I got closer to the address. The streets were empty, even for that time of night. No parked cars, no lights in nearby houses, nothing that suggested anyone was awake. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it did make me double-check the navigation to make sure I hadn't taken a wrong turn. The app confirmed I was in the right place. The house itself sat a little further back from the road than the others, partially hidden behind a line of overgrown bushes. There were no lights on anywhere, not in the windows, not on the porch, nothing. It didn't look abandoned, just inactive, like it had been left alone for longer than it should have been. I slowed the car as I pulled up, expecting at least some movement inside, maybe someone turning on a light or opening the door, but nothing changed. That's when I checked the delivery instructions again. Leave at door. Don't knock. It wasn't unusual to have contactless deliveries, especially late at night, but something about the wording felt more deliberate than usual. Most people just wrote, "Leave at door," and left it at that. This felt specific, like it mattered that I didn't make any noise. I grabbed the package and stepped out of the car, the sound of the door closing behind me feeling louder than it should have in the silence. The air felt still, heavier somehow, like everything around me was holding in place. As I walked up the short path to the house, I noticed the front door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just enough to leave a narrow gap, like someone had pulled it shut but didn't let it latch. I paused for a second at the bottom of the steps, just looking at it. Looking back, that was probably the moment I should have stopped and reconsidered, but there wasn't anything clearly wrong. Just small details that didn't quite add up. So I kept going. The closer I got, the more aware I became of how quiet it was. No sound from inside the house, no movement, nothing shifting or settling the way you'd expect in an occupied space. Even outside, there were no background noises. No distant cars, no wind, nothing. It didn't feel like normal silence. It felt intentional. I reached the door and placed the package carefully on the ground just to the side of the opening. I made sure not to touch the door itself. I didn't know why, but it felt like crossing some kind of line if I did. For a moment, I just stood there. I told myself I was waiting to hear something, maybe footsteps or a voice from inside, but the truth is, I felt like someone was already there, just out of sight, watching. There wasn't any clear sign of it. No shadow moving, no sound giving it away, just a feeling that settled in slowly, like I'd stepped into a space I wasn't meant to be in. I should have left right then. Instead, I took a small step back, then another, trying to move quietly, even though I hadn't made any noise to begin with. My eyes stayed on the door as I backed away, half expecting it to open wider or someone to step out. Nothing happened. I turned and walked back to my car, trying to ignore the way the back of my neck felt tense, like I was being followed without anything actually moving behind me. When I reached the car, I didn't get in right away. I looked back at the house one more time. That's when I saw it. The door was moving. Slowly, almost carefully, it started to close. Not a sudden movement like it had been pushed, but steady, controlled, like someone was pulling it from the inside. I stood there longer than I should have, watching it. It didn't slam. It didn't make any sound at all. It just kept moving until it was fully shut. And then everything was still again. I got into the car after that, a little quicker than I had planned, and drove off without waiting for any confirmation or message. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that maybe there was someone inside who didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe someone who didn't like answering the door. That explanation made sense at the time. But the feeling didn't go away. Later that night, when things had calmed down and I had a moment to check my completed deliveries, I looked for that order again. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a note, maybe a tip, something that confirmed it had been real. Instead, I saw that it had already been marked as delivered. Instantly, I checked the delivery later. It was marked completed instantly. Story 2, the man who knew my name the second time something felt off. It wasn't as quiet or empty as the first. In fact, it was the opposite. There was someone there waiting before I even arrived. The order came in late again. Somewhere between the last wave of normal deliveries and that stretch of time where everything starts to slow down. The address wasn't tied to a house or a building, just a roadside location a few minutes outside the main area I usually worked in. I hesitated for a second when I saw it, mostly because I didn't recognize the spot, but the app showed it clearly enough. No warnings, no issues. It's just a pin dropped on the side of a long, empty road. I didn't think much of it at the time. The drive out there took longer than usual. Streetlights thinned out, houses became less frequent, and eventually it was just open road, with patches of darkness between each stretch of light. The navigation kept updating, guiding me forward like everything was normal. But the further I went, the more it felt like I was leaving the part of the city I understood. When I got close, I slowed down, scanning the sides of the road for anything that matched the location. That's when I saw him. He was already standing there, just off to the side, near the edge of the road. No car, no house nearby, nothing that explained why he was there. He wasn't moving, just standing still like he had been waiting for a while. I pulled over a few feet ahead of him and grabbed the package, trying not to stare too much. People waited outside sometimes, especially when they didn't want to give a full address. It wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible either. I stepped out of the car, and before I could say anything, before I even had a chance to greet him or confirm the order, he spoke. He said my name. Just my first name, clearly like he already knew it. I stopped for a second thinking I might have misheard him, but he repeated it. Same tone, same calm delivery. That's when something didn't line up. The app didn't show driver names. Not publicly, not to customers. I'd been doing this long enough to know that for sure. I didn't say anything about it, just nodded, like it wasn't strange, and handed him the package. Up close, he avoided looking directly at me. His eyes stayed somewhere off to the side, like he was focused on something behind me, or just didn't want to make eye contact. It wasn't nervousness exactly, more like he was deliberately choosing not to look. Long night? He asked. It was a normal question, but the way he said it felt off. Not casual, not conversational, just placed there, like he was following a script. Yeah, I said, keeping it short. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me. Then he asked another question, something about how long I'd been working, how often I took deliveries in that area. It wasn't aggressive, just unnecessary. Most customers didn't care enough to ask anything beyond the basics. I answered briefly, not giving him much, and waited for the moment where the interaction would naturally end. But it didn't. He just stood there, holding the package, not opening it, not moving, like he was waiting for something else. After a few seconds, I stepped back slightly, giving a small nod to signal I was leaving. All right, I said. Have a good night. He didn't respond right away. Then, just as I turned to walk back to my car, he said my name again. Same tone, same calm delivery. I didn't turn around that time. I just kept walking, trying not to let it show that something about it bothered me. When I got back to the car, I glanced at him through the side mirror. He was still standing in the same spot. The package was still in his hands, but he hadn't moved toward anything. There was nowhere for him to go. No house, no car, nothing waiting for him further down the road. He just stood there, holding it. I stayed there for a second longer than I should have, watching, expecting him to do something. Anything that made sense. He didn't. Eventually, I started the car and drove off, the road stretching out ahead of me like nothing had happened. I told myself it was just a strange interaction. People act differently at night. Maybe he had his reasons for being there, for knowing my name somehow. But the feeling stuck with me longer than it should have. Later, when I had a moment to check my completed orders, I went back to that delivery. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to confirm something or just make sure I hadn't imagined part of it. But when I looked for it, it wasn't there. There's no record, no trace, nothing in the history. Like it had never been accepted in the first place. That's when I started paying attention. Story 3. The apartment that didn't exist the third time it happened. I tried to convince myself it was just a mistake before I even got there. Then I'd started noticing patterns, small things that didn't add up. But I still didn't have anything solid to point to. Just a feeling that certain deliveries didn't follow the same rules as the others. This one came through like any normal apartment drop-off. Its full address, building name, unit number, everything filled in the way it should be. The surface, there was nothing unusual about it. I picked up the order and followed the route without thinking too much about it. It wasn't far, just a few minutes into a residential area I'd been to plenty of times before. The building itself looked normal when I pulled up. Lights were on in some of the windows, a couple of cars parked outside, nothing that stood out. I parked, grabbed the package, and headed inside. The lobby was quiet, but not empty. A dim overhead light, a few mailboxes along the wall, and a directory near the entrance listing apartment numbers and names. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. I just pressed the elevator button and waited. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from the customer. "Come up, I'm waiting." It was simple, direct, not unusual, but something about the timing felt off. Most people waited until you were close to the door before messaging. This came before I'd even stepped into the elevator. I typed a quick reply saying I was on my way and stepped inside as the doors opened. The floor number was listed clearly in the order. I pressed it and watched the numbers tick up as the elevator moved. Everything felt normal, routine, just like any other delivery. But when the doors opened, the hallway didn't feel the same. It wasn't dark, but the lighting was uneven, like some of the bulbs were dimmer than others. A faint flicker came and went from one of the ceiling lights further down. It's not enough to leave anything in complete darkness, but enough to draw your attention to it. I stepped out and checked my phone again, confirming the unit number. Then I looked at the doors. The numbers ran in sequence, just like they should have. I walked slowly down the hallway, counting them as I passed. Each one matched what I expected to see, until it didn't. The number I was looking for just wasn't there. I stopped halfway down the hall and turned back, thinking I might have missed it. I checked again, moving more carefully this time, but the sequence skipped right over it. The units jumped from one number to the next, like the one in between had never existed. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was on the other side of the floor, I thought. Some buildings split, numbering across different sections. Before I could turn around, my phone buzzed again. "Come up. I'm waiting." Same message. No change. I looked down at the screen, then back at the hallway. "I'm on the floor," I typed. "Can you confirm the unit?" The response came almost immediately. "It's there." That was it. No clarification, no additional detail. I hesitated, then walked back toward the elevator, thinking maybe I'd missed a second corridor or another set of units. As I reached the corner near the elevators, I noticed a door slightly ajar, with light coming from inside. A resident. I knocked lightly and waited. After a few seconds, someone opened it just enough to look out. Explained I was trying to find a unit number that didn't seem to be listed. They frowned slightly and shook their head. "That number doesn't exist," they said. "Not on this floor." I asked if maybe it was somewhere else in the building. They shook their head again. "No, the numbering here doesn't skip like that." I thanked them and stepped back, the door closing quietly behind them. For a second, I considered just leaving, marking the order as undeliverable and moving on. But my phone buzzed again. "Come up, I'm waiting." This time it felt less like a message and more like a reminder. I turned back toward the hallway, staring at the spot where the number should have been, and that's when I noticed it. The space between two doors looked slightly wider than the others. It's not by much, just enough to stand out if you were already paying attention. Walked toward it slowly. The flickering light above made it harder to focus, the brightness shifting just enough to distort the edges of what I was looking at. When I got closer, I realized what I was seeing. There was no door, no handle, no frame, nothing. Just a flat section of wall where a unit should have been. Stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, waiting for something to change or make sense. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down. Order delivered. I hadn't touched anything. I hadn't marked it, hadn't taken a picture, nothing. The app had done it on its own. I didn't stay there after that. I turned and walked back toward the elevator, trying to keep my pace steady, even though something in me wanted to move faster. The hallway felt longer on the way back, quieter, like the air had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. I just pressed the button, waited for the elevator, and stepped inside as soon as the doors opened. Only when they closed did I let myself breathe properly. I left the building. But it felt like I wasn't alone in that hallway. Story 4. The same order, different night by that point. I had started noticing things more carefully, even if I didn't fully understand what I was looking for. I paid closer attention to order details, addresses, timing. Nothing obvious stood out most nights, but every now and then something would feel just slightly out of place. This was one of those times. The order came through like any other, but something about it caught my attention immediately. I didn't realize why at first. It just felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Same restaurant, same items, same delivery instructions. I stared at the screen a little longer than usual, trying to place where I'd seen it before. Then it clicked. I'd done this order already. Not recently either. Long enough ago that it shouldn't have still been fresh in my mind, but the details matched too closely to ignore. Even the way the instructions were written felt the same, like it had been copied exactly. I didn't think much of it at the time, at least not in a serious way. People reorder the same things all the time. Same meals, same addresses, same habits. That wasn't unusual. Still, something about it felt different. Accepted the order and picked it up, telling myself it was probably just a coincidence. That was the easiest explanation, and the one that made the most sense. The drive out felt familiar too. Not in a general way, but specific. Certain turns felt expected before the navigation even prompted them. I found myself anticipating where the road would curve, where the streetlights would thin out, like I'd already been through it more recently than I remembered. I tried to ignore that feeling. When I reached the address, I slowed down just like I had the first time. But the house didn't look exactly the same. It was subtle, and the layout was right, the position, the shape, everything matched, but small details felt off. The color of the door looked slightly different under the porch light. There was a chair near the entrance that I didn't remember being there before. Even the way the light hit the windows felt different. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was misremembering. That happens. You think you recognize a place, but your memory fills in details that aren't actually accurate. That explanation should have been enough, but it wasn't. I grabbed the package and walked up to the door, noticing the same instructions again. Simple, direct, just like before. I knocked this time. The door opened after a few seconds. The person standing there looked at me like they'd never seen me before. No recognition, no hesitation, just a normal expression. Like this was the first time they were receiving this delivery. "Hey," they said, casual, like nothing about this was unusual. I handed them the package, watching for any sign that they might remember me, even slightly. There was nothing. "Thanks," they said, and started to close the door. I almost said something, asked if they'd ordered the same thing before, if they remembered a previous delivery. But something held me back. Didn't feel like a normal question to ask. So I just nodded and stepped away. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at the house again. From a distance, it looked completely normal. No differences, no strange details, it's just another house on a quiet street. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, trying to shake the feeling that I'd just repeated something without realizing it. Like I'd stepped into the same moment twice, but only one of them made sense. Eventually, I drove off and moved on to the next order, telling myself it wasn't worth thinking about. But later that night, when things slowed down, I checked my delivery history. I wanted to confirm it, to find the earlier version of that order and prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. I scrolled through the list, going back further than I normally would. It wasn't there. No duplicate, no earlier record, nothing that matched those details. I checked my history. That order was never there. Aftermath, what I found later after that last night, I couldn't just let it go. I tried at first, telling myself it was just a bad shift, a series of coincidences that felt worse than they actually were. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. So I started checking things. The first place I looked was my delivery history. I went through everything, scrolling back further than I normally would, trying to find anything that matched those nights. The house with no lights. The roadside stop. The apartment that didn't exist. The repeated order. None of them were there. Not partially, not incorrectly logged, just completely missing. It was like those deliveries had never been accepted in the first place. At first, I assumed it was some kind of system error. Maybe the app had glitched. Maybe certain orders hadn't saved properly. It didn't seem impossible, so I contacted support. I kept it simple. Just asked if there had been any issues with order tracking or missing history. I didn't go into detail, didn't mention anything specific. I didn't think they'd take it seriously if I did. They responded with a standard answer. Everything looked normal on their end. No missing data, no reported issues, no sign that anything had gone wrong. I tried asking again, this time referencing a specific date, but the response didn't change. According to them, every delivery I had completed was accounted for, which didn't make sense. Because I remembered those orders clearly, not just the events, but the details. It's the way they felt, the things that didn't line up. You don't forget something like that. Still, I needed something more concrete. So I went back to a few of the locations. During the day, when everything felt more normal, the house from the first delivery was there, but it didn't look the same. The layout matched, but the details were different. The door was a different color, the bushes were trimmed, and there were signs that someone actually lived there. No indication of anything unusual. The roadside location didn't make sense at all in daylight. There was nothing there. No place for someone to stand, no nearby structure, no reason for anyone to be waiting on that stretch of road. In the apartment building. I checked the directory again. The numbering was consistent. No missing units, no gaps. Just a normal sequence of doors, exactly like the resident had said. Everything looked normal, too normal. That's when the pattern started to become clearer. It wasn't just that those deliveries were strange. It was that they didn't exist anywhere outside of the moment they happened. No records, no confirmation. No physical evidence that matched what I experienced. Maybe those deliveries weren't mistakes. That thought stayed with me longer than anything else. Lingering ending? I don't deliver anymore. I stopped doing deliveries not long after that. At first, I told people it was because of the hours. 8 nights. Inconsistent pay. The usual reasons that make sense, without needing much explanation. It was easier to say that than try to describe something I couldn't fully understand myself. But that wasn't really it. I could have adjusted my schedule, worked during the day, avoided the quieter routes. There were ways to keep going if I wanted to. I just didn't. Because once I started looking back at those nights, really thinking about them, it didn't feel like a series of random incidents anymore. It felt connected in a way I couldn't explain. The missing records, the locations that didn't match. The people who seemed to know more than they should have. I don't know who placed those orders, or why they never showed up anywhere afterward. I don't know why certain places felt different at night, or why some of those interactions stayed with me longer than they should have. What I do know is that none of it felt accidental. That's the part I can't shake. I deleted the app a few days later, cleared everything, signed out, made sure there was no reason for it to contact me again. For a while, that seemed to work. Things went back to normal, or at least something close to it. But every now and then, usually late at night, I still feel that same kind of quiet settle in. The kind that doesn't feel empty, just waiting. And sometimes, my phone lights up. No app installed, no account active. Just a notification. Sometimes I still get notifications. Even though I deleted the app,